Lixian is someone that a lot of you have definitely heard of. He's best known as being Markiplier's editor and has been for nearly half a decade at this point. But he also has been an animator for many years, making some of the most recognizable Markiplier animations, as well as a YouTube content creator, composer, and a game developer. Lixian is someone that I have been a big fan of and respected for many years. There are very few creators or even people that I admire as much as I do Lixian, and I genuinely credit him as being a big reason I am even where I am today. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this guy. I'm also a big fan of indie horror games, and have built my entire career off of them. And hey, what do you know? Lixian is now making primarily indie horror games. What a perfect excuse to make a video where I fangirl over how much I love Lixian's work. In this video, I will be reviewing every single game that Lixian has made and released. Well, technically 2 of them haven't been released, but we'll get to that. Disclaimer that not all of these games are horror games, so some of these will be out of my niche, but hopefully you're all okay with that. We're going to go through all 9, yes, 9 of these games one by one in order of release. From Game Jam entries to paid-for commercial games, from pixel art to 3D graphics, from shoot-em-ups to clicker games, from Game Maker to Unreal, this is the wild world of Lixian's games. Shield Blast was Lixian's first ever game released to the public, and I cannot overstate how astoundingly good this is for a first game. This is an old school type of shoot 'em up with vibrant pixel art, fun music, a cool little gimmick, and overall fun gameplay. This might be my favorite shoot 'em up ever made. The first element of design I'd like to talk about in Shield Blast is the pixel art and the overall style, because that's definitely what makes this game something special. There are probably thousands of different shoot-em-up games in this exact same format. This has been a genre of gaming since the 80s or even 70s. However, this one has some of the prettiest artwork of them all. The enemies are also distinct and unique, making every level feel fresh and vibrant, and the boss fights are so outstanding and exciting. The game is just stunning to look at and is so clearly Lixian style. Every detail in the visuals of this game just feels like it was made by Lixian, and as someone that adores Lixian style, but also respects when a developer or artist is able to reach a point where you can easily recognize their work, this game is just so pleasant to look at. But not only do the visuals and art make this game outstanding in its genre, the soundtrack of this game is incredibly impressive, especially again for a first game to release. The OST of Shield Blast consists of 21 individual tracks all composed by Lixian himself. And when you have a game like a shoot 'em up or any other genre or type of game that has been done so many times, details like its music and sound effects are such an important part of making the game feel like a unique experience for the player. This is something Lixian clearly understood, worked on, and continued to keep in mind throughout his path of game development. Aside from the visual and audio side of things though, Shield Blast is just ridiculously fun. It's much more hectic than most shoot 'em up games, and that is definitely intentional and designed to make you utilize the core mechanic, the Shield Blast. Using the Shield Blast decimates everything in your path within a certain range, but it has a cooldown and will stop working if you get hit by enemies too many times. Since the Shield Blast can kill off enemies across the entire width of the screen, this allows the game to be very harsh with its attacks, but still forcing you to use the Shield Blast sparingly. This is a very simple mechanic, but it's just enough to make the game different from other games in the genre. As someone that played a lot of arcade games growing up, Galaga being a personal favorite of mine, I definitely have a soft spot for this type of game, and Shield Blast is so polished and exciting, it's definitely one of the best shoot-em-ups I've played. This is a pretty incredible achievement for a first game, with all the original artwork and music being so high quality, and I highly recommend it. I genuinely think it's a fantastic game. Mind Ripple is a short platformer where you have the ability to move stuff around with your mind, and although the sole purpose of this video is pretty much to talk about how much I love and respect Lixian's work, I do not like or even understand this game. This is a very basic and simple platformer where you can move around objects within your proximity. This idea is fine, and there are things I like about it. The style in this one is pretty distinct and amazing, but I am genuinely not convinced I played this game properly. To solve the puzzles, where you need to use blocks around you to apply weight to buttons, I kinda just stood as close as I could to the block to remain within the range that I could still move it, and just dragged it along. You're seeing the footage. There's no way this is the correct way to do it, but I don't know what other option there was. There are some more traditional puzzles with the blocks, though, that I could actually figure out without slowly and painfully dragging myself through it. This game actually kind of reminds me of Portal from a gameplay perspective. I don't really know why, aside from there just being blocks that you use for puzzles, but that is the first thing that popped into my mind when I played it. And there's a couple moments where it's a more traditional platformer. You have to avoid obstacles and make sure not to drown in blood. The actual platforming in this game feels alright. I'm not going to give this game a very hard time because it was made in 48 hours for a game jam back in 2018. We'll be talking about Do It For Me next, and that was made in even less time, and spoilers, it is absolutely fire. But Lixian had a lot less experience when developing Mind Ripple, and I'm sure that jam was pretty stressful to actually finish in time. However, like I mentioned briefly, one thing I do appreciate about this game quite a bit is its style. And this is actually the only game in this video, at least to my knowledge, where the art was done by someone else. That actually did surprise me because this very much feels like Lixian's style, but the more I look at it and compare it to Lixian's other work, I can see the difference. This game is very focused on feeling psychedelic and trippy with its very wavy backgrounds and the weird contrast between dark and bright colors. I really enjoy this game's art direction, even though now that I have been made to think about it, it kind of stands out in a weird way in Lixian's catalog, but that is not a bad thing by any means. Mind Ripple is fine and pretty decent for a game jam entry, I suppose. However, of every game Lixian has released to the public, this is the only one I have no desire to come back to. I can appreciate elements of it, but I just don't really care for this one, unfortunately. Do It For Me is the third game on our list, and it is genuinely fire. For the record, I'm only going to be talking about the full release for this game. For those of you that don't know, Lixian made Do It For Me for a game jam in 2019, but after the game was entered into the jam, Lixian took time to polish it, fix some issues, and add more content. I could talk about the jam version and the full game to compare the two, but the full release is essentially a replacement for the jam version, so I'm comfortable with just talking about that one. The theme for the game jam that Do It For Me was a part of was Love Is Blind, which I am now realizing is a somewhat strange idea for a jam theme, and I'd actually really like to check out what other developers did with that. Do It For Me managed to encapsulate this theme in a both figurative and literal sense, and it's all very fascinating. Here is the premise of the game. You are a young boy who has a crush on a borderline psychopathic girl. The whole game consists of you collecting hearts and killing these little adorable enemies called woofles. However, as you proceed through levels, weird things start to happen. There are cracks in the world showcasing entirely different environments, the colors become darker and more depressing, the music even changes pitch to be more low and more distorted. This is reality trying to break through to you, and that is because all of the little woofles that you are killing are actually students at your school. You are being manipulated by this girl to fulfill her sick and twisted desires. For one, this premise is really creative for the theme, and it's a really interesting idea for a game made just for a jam. The big twist at the end that reveals what you've done is pretty haunting, and I think it's really cool. And here I want to take into account that, aside from Mind Ripple having kind of a psychedelic horror kind of feel to it, Do It For Me is pretty much Lixian's first real attempt at horror in one of his games, and I personally don't think it falls flat whatsoever. This game will not make you jump, and it will only slightly make you uncomfortable, but for a first real attempt at this, that we've seen at the very least, I think the elements of horror here are quite impressive. I love the way reality tries its best to break through to you, but just leaves you, the player, confused and is ignored by the protagonist. The glitchy effects along the way are really off-putting, and my favorite detail is the changing of the music. That is a really cool addition to the horror in the game. This game isn't terrifying, and Lixian would develop his abilities to make horror over time, but I think the horror in this game is really neat and actually pretty unique. However, my favorite thing about this game is that it is very, very fun. The platforming in this game feels very smooth, and the level design is really impressive. Remember when I briefly said that the Love Is Blind theme was made in a figurative and literal way? Well, the figurative way was obviously that your love for this girl blinded you from the atrocities you were committing. However, the literal way is that collecting hearts in this game causes platforms to disappear. This game's puzzles are super creative and well thought out. Collecting hearts and killing woofles both alter the level around you, so you need to do everything in the correct order, or just choose to leave a heart behind, or a woofle's still alive. And this game has 5 different endings to account for this. There's an ending for collecting all the hearts and killing all the woofles, an ending for collecting all hearts and killing no woofles, an ending for collecting 0 hearts and killing all woofles, an ending for collecting some hearts and killing some woofles, and an ending for collecting nothing and killing nothing. I hope I said all that correctly. I absolutely adore this because it actually makes the game really replayable. Every time I replay this game, I feel the need to get every single ending. The fact that this game is a platformer that can be played in so many ways makes it so enjoyable and legitimately impressive. The full release of Do It For Me also came with an OST that suits the game pretty well. The music of the main menu has a melodramatic sound. The music that plays for most of the game is exciting and upbeat until later it changes to be more dark and eerie, and there's different music for a couple of the endings as well. I can't in good conscience say it's as good as Shield Blast's 20-song OST, but it's definitely memorable and adds a lot to the experience. Do It For Me is honestly a pretty flawless game that, although not on par with something like Shield Blast, is a really fun time. Shield Blast is just too polished and impressive with the sheer variety in its creativity to be matched by an advanced version of a Game Jam game, but that doesn't mean Do It For Me isn't a really high-quality game that's fun to play and displays a solid understanding of the horror genre. I really like this game, and I love to come back to it pretty often. Damien is the game that most of you will recognize the most because it is the game that Lixian famously made specifically for Markiplier. In 2019, Lixian made a game called Damien based on Markiplier's animated short film by the same name, for Markiplier's birthday. Since it was a gift for Mark, this game is not available to the public, therefore I can only analyze it based on Mark's playthrough and Lixian's devlog. For that reason, I probably won't talk about it as much as Lixian's other games, but there are plenty of things we can discuss on a purely surface level. For example, this is actually a very impressive game when you take into account that this was Lixian's first real game in 3D, and it was made in a very short period of time. This is a pretty decent 3D Unity horror game given the lack of experience and lack of time. What this game does best is capture a cinematic experience. It really does feel like an altered, playable version of the Damien short film. There's very little gameplay, there's extremely simplistic level design, and the game is very straightforward. So much so that basically everything you have to do is told to you on screen. But the formula feels like Damien, the environments feels like Damien, the actual use of the Damien animation feels very natural. With that being said, I do think the lack of gameplay is this game's biggest flaw. You have an axe that you use, but it's really only used to chop wood to pass time and to break some strangely powerful sticks a couple times. There are monsters in this game, one of them chases you at the end, but all you really have to do is walk forward. However, I do still feel like this game has something to offer because everything that surrounds the mundane gameplay is pretty well put together. The way the frozen lake glows and explodes as you run across it at the end is really cool. The way this sequence of being lost in the forest legitimately makes you feel lost and uneasy is pretty impressive. The use of what Lixian calls the void is pretty interesting and executed nicely. And what I want to give Lixian the most credit for is the animation work in this game. It isn't fantastic, it's not AAA quality animation or anything, but this was the first time Lixian even attempted 3D animation, and he managed to pull it off in such a short amount of time, and I think it turned out pretty good. For being such an ambitious project given the circumstance, I think Damien turned out pretty solid at the time. I can't play it, which makes it harder for me to give an opinion on the actual experience of the game and how it plays, but seeing the game from Mark's perspective, and then understanding it better with Lixian's devlog, I definitely think there's lots to love in Damien. However, I do feel like that everything that would make it a really good experience is kind of reliant on understanding the Damien short film from Markiplier. Again, I do think the animation work in the game is woven into the game nicely, but I do feel like a lot of the context is missing without that short, and although it's not a public game, that is a bit of an issue if it were to be a public game. However, I actually think everything turned out surprisingly nice, again, for a first attempt at so many of the things featured in this game, and again, the time constraint. Is the game great? Probably not, and I think Lixian could absolutely make something much better now. There definitely could have been more creativity in the level designs, the gameplay, and the scares. That one somewhat infamous moment with the skulls was such a bizarre detail that by Lixian's own admission, wasn't executed very well. However, this game does have one pretty good scary element where there's knocking while you're in the cabin and then you look in the mirror and see a freakish monster. I think that whole sequence there is put together pretty well, and again, I like all the sections of the void. I see Damien as a crucial step in Lixian's journey as a game developer because of how much he had to experiment to make it, but it probably isn't his best overall. However, it is charming, and obviously it's something special for Markiplier and Lixian, which is all that really matters. There's no point in really critiquing this game on like a fundamental perspective. Ricochet Gun is the next game on the list, and I did not know this game existed. This is one of the 2 games Lixian has made and released on itch, but not on GameJolt, and I've never even seen him discuss it on his channel. I try to remind myself to browse itch for some indie horror titles, but ultimately I always go back to GameJolt and of course Steam. So yeah, a lot of the stuff on itch just goes over my head. So yeah, I honestly didn't even remember to check Lixian's itch until I started writing this script. I recognized the latest game, despite it only being on itch, because Lixian talked about it on his channel. But then there was this random non-horror game called Ricochet Gun that I did not know was a thing. So I played it, and it's fine. I can kind of see why this game is like the least talked about of the bunch. The mechanics remind me of a mobile game called Mr. Bullet. I don't know if this is a niche reference or not, but if you know, then this will make complete sense. Basically, you have a gun that you use to shoot enemies, but if you miss your shot, then the bullet bounces around and bounces off walls. This game actually does something different than most games that are like this, however. If you do not kill an enemy before the bullet hits a single wall, it will bounce around until it hits you, or until it hits the corpse of an enemy, and that will bring it back to life. The fact that you need to hit an enemy on your first shot is really frustrating, but it does somewhat help spice up an idea that has been done many times before. However, if I'm being honest, the level design of this game does unfortunately make it a little boring and more frustrating. A game where you have to plan out your shots so they bounce off a platform to hit an enemy would have been more interesting than having to wait for the perfect time to fire your shot through a very tight gap. Why do I have to do this so many times? Although the level design is generally mid and the gameplay itself is pretty unoriginal, I still think it's an okay time. It's so simple and so similar to games that I've played before that I understood it immediately, unlike a game like Mind Ripple. Even though the controls told to you are literally incorrect in the first stage. The biggest issue I have with this game, and this may seem insignificant, and that is because it is the music. The music in this game is so weird and boring, and is nothing but the same few notes looping over and over. I didn't bring up the music in Mind Ripple, because it was just forgettable, but totally solid for a Game Jam game. Do It For Me just didn't have music on launch, which although could be disappointing, especially because Lixian is a legitimately good composer, it is genuinely preferable over the music in Ricochet Gun. I would rather there be no music than a weird choppy loop just run in the background the whole time. Ricochet Gun is the game I have the least to say about. If you couldn't tell, this was also a Game Jam game. It's a pretty good jam game, but another that I will probably not play again. I do see this as a downgrade from Do It For Me by a pretty significant margin, even just the Game Jam version, but I think this one is a step up from Mind Ripple. And of course, I don't expect a Game Jam game to be as good as a game like Shield Blast. There's not much of a reason to linger on this one. Let's just move past it. The Warfstache Clicker is the other game that Lixian made specifically for Markiplier. This was Lixian's gift for Mark's birthday in 2021, and therefore, like Damien, it is not available to be played by the public. However, there is plenty to be seen as a viewer, and this game is definitely one of Lixian's most impressive. The Warfstache Clicker, as you could probably gather from the name, is a clicker game, but it is also so much more than that. This game is half clicker game and half top-down horror game where you explore the area and find secrets. It's a really interesting and creative format that's executed nicely. First thing I'd like to mention is that this game has a really fun presence and is genuinely hilarious. This is a game where Wilford Warfstache is manipulating you to help him open this door. You need to touch his mustache, collect tactical shovels, mine for Warf coins, Wilford's brand new cryptocurrency, and obtain dark energy. This game is full of inside jokes and references to Markiplier and his content, and it's all really charming. And all of Wilford Warfstache's dialogue really does feel like the character, which is both funny and again charming. But this game does also succeed at being a horror game. Lixian displays an understanding of horror that we haven't really seen up to this point. You can really see how much he has improved here. The way he utilizes lighting and sound design is really effective here, and the timing of all his scares is really good. And the artwork in this game is absolutely incredible and the most varied of any game in this video. The drawings of Wilford and the clicker part of the game is so distinctly Lixian style, and it's so cute and pleasant to look at. The pixel art is fantastic and really blends into the game nicely despite how different the styles are. And this game's ending is amazing. The art is gorgeous, it has some great references, and it is very, very funny. Damien was a perfect love letter to the Damien short film, but the Warfstache Clicker is a perfect love letter to pretty much all of Markiplier's creative work that had been released up to that point. There are multiple art styles that are pulled off perfectly, there are several references that any Markiplier fan would adore, there are multiple types of games that are put together to make an enjoyable experience, and Lixian made all the music for this game as well. Lixian really went above and beyond, and likely pushed himself out of his comfort zone for the Warfstache Clicker, and though that does make me sad because I can't play it, it is legitimately the perfect gift for Markiplier. Lixian put so much thought and effort into every element of this game's design, and was so experimental with it, and it all ended up being basically perfect. Night Mop is the next in the Lixian saga, and it is his first game made in Unreal Engine. This becomes immediately apparent as the quality of this game is pretty incredible for a first project that is pretty short and simple. Night Mop is essentially a cleaning simulator that is also spooky. You seemingly work as a housekeeper, and you have to clean up this person's house before the morning. The time here doesn't actually matter though, it's an irrelevant detail. You pick up trash and throw it away, Swiffer some stains, and get rid of the pool of blood. Yeah, the premise of this game is that the owner of the house summoned a demon and forgot about it, which I won't lie is unironically very funny. That is something I love about this game. It's both funny and scary. The dialogue and endings truly feel like Lixian's style of silly, cute comedy, and it's really funny. This is a very funny game. But this game is also Lixian's scariest game so far. Well, except for maybe the Warfstache Clicker, but as we have established, I can't play it, so I can't really judge it in the same way. The lighting in this place is legitimately eerie, and the simple jump scares are sparse enough to actually be very effective. Not really the final one, though. It is quite underwhelming, but that's okay. I mean, I say it's underwhelming. Markiplier nearly fucking died seeing it, so I guess I'm just crazy. I don't know. This game is honestly stunning, though. You can definitely see the upgrade from moving to Unreal. All the assets are pretty, the place looks and feels pretty realistic, and the little scares are all nice touches. There's a simple but solid jump scare in the office that definitely caught me off guard. This one shot that the game is probably most known for isn't necessarily scary, but I really like the visual of it. And something I didn't notice until like my 10th playthrough is that there's a hand that pokes out from under the bed. That didn't make me jump in my seat by any means, but it was pretty freaky given that I genuinely didn't know it'd be there, and I had played this game so many times before noticing. And something I actually love about this game is the lack of a present threat. I rewatched Lixian's video on the making of Damien while working on this video, and something he said that he changed his mind on was a horror game needs a threat. Now, is it easier to make a horror game that has an active threat? Yes, objectively yes, but you can rely on atmosphere, the aesthetic, and subtle scares that don't harm you to make a legitimate horror experience. I don't want to act like this game is a horror masterpiece. This game will not make you cry in fear, but I genuinely believe this game showed Lixian has strengths in the horror genre and captures a surprisingly impressive level of eeriness. Night Mop is also just fun. It's not Lixian's most replayable. I would likely still go back to Shield Blast or Do It For Me for replayability, but Night Mop's simple gameplay loop in this charming environment is a satisfying experience. There isn't much to the gameplay, and again, there is literally no threat. You cannot lose in Night Mop, but it's an enjoyable time that I definitely will go back to from time to time. Night Mop is actually a solid horror game in my opinion. It is too short and simple to be great, I acknowledge that, but for being the developer's first game in the engine, I think it's a great time. The second to last game on our list for today is Sinking Iron. This is an interesting one because it's technically the only game Lixian has made, aside from Damien if you want to be technical, that is pretty close to a proper fan game. Sinking Iron is heavily inspired by both Iron Lung and Five Nights at Freddy's, two things that I strongly, famously dislike. One of my hotter takes is definitely my hatred of Iron Lung as a game, and I am still on my hating FNAF arc despite how much I enjoyed the movie, so that somewhat caused me to ignore this game for a little bit. However, this game is so fire, and sometimes in life you have to be proven wrong. I will try my best to not make the Iron Lung fans angry, but my main issue with the game is that it is boring. The atmosphere is great, and I do think that's a significant factor for horror games in particular, but when that's the only thing a game has going for it, I find it to be an absolute snore. Sinking Iron actually has gameplay, and it's a really satisfying gameplay loop. There are two levels. In the first, all you have to do is make sure to repair the damage done to your submarine while you're on it. Walls will cave in, and you need to use a hammer to fix the dents, and you use a welding gun to fix leaks. You need to keep up with the damage to the submarine to make sure you don't, drown. On the second level, the big spooky eye monster is active, and you need to flash them with a bright light when they come to one of the three windows. This is, I believe, what makes this game FNAF-like at all. It has a certain type of juggling mechanics to ward off active threats like a classic FNAF game would. However, this game is clearly way more inspired by Iron Lung than FNAF. With all that being said, this game is extremely fun. Again, my problem with Iron Lung has always been that just a shred of gameplay to the formula would elevate the game's quality significantly. Sinking Iron from Lixian immediately solved that problem of mine by giving me an enjoyable and suspenseful gameplay loop. This game is legitimately challenging, and you have to be very careful and efficient and attentive to keep up with the destruction and threats coming your way. As I've said, I think Lixian shows a solid understanding of horror fundamentally with games like Do It For Me, the Warfstache Clicker, and Late Night Mop, but no game from him has made my heart race quite like Sinking Iron. This game, like Iron Lung, really encapsulates a claustrophobic feeling that is captivating yet stressful, and the difficulty of this game and the risk of failure makes the experience beyond tense. And there are some significant details in Sinking Iron that add a lot to the experience beyond the enjoyable gameplay loop. Lixian once again made all the music for this game himself, and it really helps build the atmosphere and makes the game feel a lot more special. Lixian also showcases some voice acting, which I was not expecting and was very impressed by. He voices the captain that instructs you on your tasks and also gets brutally murdered by the big sea monster. Lixian achieved a tone in his voice that I had never heard before, and put on a really solid performance. This game also has a hard mode, which adds more replayability and a unique ending for said hard mode. For such a simple game, there's a lot of perfected details and additional content that make it truly something great. Like, all you do in this game is get onto the submarine, do the first level that I described, and then you do the second level that I described, then you get out of the submarine, and then everybody dies. But all the finite details make the game really good, honestly. And this game does also look nice, but I can't help but wish that it was made in Unreal. All the assets are good, and everything looks on par or even above a lot of the indie horror scene, but after Late Night Mop and how beautiful that game looked despite its simplicity, I can't help but imagine how stunning Sinking Iron would be in Unreal. I feel like that could have legitimately made Sinking Iron like a really good indie horror game. Sinking Iron is one of Lixian's best games, without a doubt, and you can see his experience reflected in this project. It is extremely fun, it fundamentally understands the horror genre, it has good music, sound design, voice acting, and it's just a pleasant experience all around. The final game on our list, and the most recent game from Lixian, is Victoria's Siren. Not to be confused with Victoria's Secret, they are very different things. This game is one of the more difficult ones to talk about, and it is simultaneously one of my favorite games in this video, and one of my least favorites. What makes this game hard to talk about is that it is a game jam game, and Lixian himself was very displeased with the release. He didn't talk about it much in his most recent video, as the time of this recording, but he clearly wasn't happy with how it came out. Although we've gone over a lot of Game Jam games, they were all pretty complete except for Do It For Me, which then got an updated release. Victoria's Siren will also have an updated version released, but it has yet to happen. So I won't be too harsh, but you can very much see that this game would have benefited from more time. This game is like 5 minutes long, yet it's the biggest mixed bag we've got, so let's get into it. My favorite thing about this game, without a doubt, is its visuals and style. Lixian has never made a game that looks quite like this, and I adore it. It has both a retro and modern feel, it is so aesthetically pleasing and scary. I adore it. And not only is this visual style entirely different from Lixian's other work, he doesn't have another game that plays even similar to this. This is a third-person shooter where you explore a spaceship and shoot creatures aboard. It is pretty awesome, and I kind of love it. However, again, this game has problems. The most apparent and obvious problem is that if you walk up to a wall, you can see right fucking through it. It is so easy to see out of bounds, and when there are so many small rooms, you very well could do it by accident. And my other problem I have with this game may or may not even be a problem, I cannot tell. If an enemy was so close to me that they could attack me, it was like borderline impossible for me to shoot them. I genuinely cannot tell if this was a chronic skill issue, bad luck, or the fault of the game. But I died to the same enemy in this 5-minute game so many times because they were just too close to me, and every time I tried to shoot them, it wouldn't work. I cannot tell what happened. With that being said, something I got to give this game is that it is terrifying. The enemies make extremely loud screeching sounds when they charge at you, and when the rest of the sound of the game is just a very simple ambience, it is actually so discomforting. It is the only time getting footage for any of these games that I had to take my headphones off during a scare because it was just that ear-piercing, which is a bit of a negative thing in a sense, because it might be a little bit too much, but my god, it was terrifying. As far as gameplay goes, it's good, and I like it on paper, but the game is too unfinished to really say anything about it. I've pretty much said everything I have to say. It's a third-person shooter, and it's really cool, but there's so little to it. You kill about 5 enemies, collect a single thing, leave, and then it says to be continued. There is a quality blueprint here, but there hasn't been done much with it yet. This game isn't really complete, and again, Lixian didn't seem to be satisfied with this build of the game at all. However, this game could be fantastic. I am genuinely excited to see this become something bigger and more complete. With that being said, There's not much to say about the current build. It's cool, I like it, but that's about it. And that was every game Lixian has made so far. I think a good way to end this off would be to rank every single one from worst to best. I'm going to include Damien and the Warfstache Clicker in said ranking, though keep in mind it's not going to be the most accurate as it could be, because I cannot play those games and experience them authentically. My worst to best ranking would go Mind Ripple, Ricochet Gun, Damien, Victoria Siren, the Warfstache Clicker, Do It For Me, Sinking Iron, Late Night Mop, and Shield Blast. Although Shield Blast is Lixian's first game, it is still his only commercial game, so it's not that crazy for it to be at the top. Lixian is one of the only creators that I can say with confidence that I am a really big fan of. He is definitely one of the best video editors on the platform. He is a fantastic composer. He is a great game developer with so much potential. He is a wonderful artist and animator with a distinct style. He has a fundamental understanding of horror, a fundamental understanding of comedy, and he is just a charming and entertaining guy. I managed to work this video into my niche because a good chunk of these games were indie horror games, but it was also just an excuse to explore and analyze the work of a creator that I greatly respect and appreciate. I am so excited to see what Lixian does in the future. I'm looking forward to an updated version of Victoria's Siren, but Lixian has also said that his game development goal for 2024 is to start working on his first ever Steam release. And as someone that has just written a 6,000 word essay on his game development career, that is very exciting to me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Lixian's channel, Game Jolt, and Itch will all be linked in the description. Obviously, he doesn't need a shout out from me, but if you've learned about some of his work through this video and you are interested in checking it out, please do. Thank you so much for watching. I have been the baddest, and I'll see you guys later.